Hi, online comp students. I wanted to talk to you about Essay 1. Several people have already submitted, and so I haven't looked at those yet, but I want to give some extra help to those of you who haven't started yet. And if you have and you've already submitted, you're welcome to go back and make changes if you need to. So I'm looking here at the Essay 1 instructions, and I want to make sure that you understand your prompts. So the first one says, using 2 readings from this unit, write an MLA formatted essay that examines how the authors balance factual information with creative storytelling, illustrates what literary elements emphasize their ideas, presents an argument about which author relies more heavily on fact and which on creative descriptions, and explains how this impacts the credibility or ethos of each author. So that prompt is asking you to do several things. It's asking you to examine how they balance factual information and creative storytelling. It's asking you to illustrate the literary element used. It's asking you to make an argument about which one relies more heavily on fact and which one relies more heavily on creative descriptions. And it wants you to explain how that impacts the credibility of each author. So that is a complicated prompt that's asking you to do a lot of things. My suggestion to you would be, if you choose that prompt, to break it down and say, okay, I'm comparing 2 authors, okay? So you're not just summarizing what those 2 authors write about, you're examining how they write and which one appears to be more credible, given that they're both writing about factual, real things, but they're doing it creatively. Which one comes across as more credible, believable? Which one do you sort of buy into more, and why? So ultimately, I would have a thesis that made an argument about which author does a better job and why. But it doesn't have to be black and white. You could argue that one author does a better job balancing both facts and creativity. You could argue that while one of them balances factual information and creative storytelling better, this one relies more heavily on facts. This one relies more heavily on creative descriptions. And then you could also talk about this one uses these literary elements more heavily, and this one uses these literary elements more heavily. So think about how much time and attention is paid to character development. How much time and attention is paid to the actual setting? How much time and attention is paid to developing the conflict, either internal or between characters? How much attention is paid to figurative language and like symbolism and metaphor? I think you need to look at a lot of different things. Ultimately, you're making a comparison between the 2, but you've got to have a central argument that you're trying to prove throughout the paper. And it doesn't have to be this author is 100% better than this author. It could be this author is better in these ways, but this author is better in these ways. So it could be black and white, or it could be gray. It could be a mix of both. But I will tell you that is a more complicated prompt. And if you choose that one, I am looking for you to respond to every area that prompt asked you to. Prompt number 2, let me go back. In both of these, you need to pull very specific evidence, very specific quotes. You need to be able to say on this page or in this paragraph or this exact quote in order to prove what you're saying. You have to have concrete evidence. And remember, you're talking about how these authors are doing what they're doing, not just what they're doing. Okay, so it's not just summarizing this one's about this and this one's about this. It's really about analyzing how they craft those stories. Prompt number 2. Using 2 readings from this unit, write an MLA formatted essay that explains how each author addresses universal themes presented in his or her work and what literary elements are employed to develop those themes. This one is much easier. It doesn't give you as much specific direction, whereas prompt 1, you kind of know what your paragraphs are going to be based on the prompt. In this one, you have a lot more freedom. I think it's easier. Basically, you're saying, okay, here's 2 readings. Both of these address something. Okay, some sort of like universal truth, some sort of universal message, something that everybody can kind of relate to. These two authors both address this sort of common theme and then talk about how they each do it. Again, kind of like the first prompt, this author relies really heavily on the characters, how they're described, what they say, the character development to sort of get that message or that theme across. This author really uses more of the setting or the conflict. So again, you're just comparing the two and analyzing how they both develop this theme, this common theme that they both have. You need to use at least 2 literary elements for each of these. So I think, let me double check that before I make that for sure. Let me go back to your, let's see. No. Use at least 1 literary element. Okay, so character development, setting, conflict, any literary element, but you go back to your course content to make sure that you're using literary elements that you've actually been taught, that are actually in the unit. Don't just make them up. Make sure you're using that terminology correctly. Also, in your requirements, it says utilize information from at least 2 sources. So you have to be talking about 2 authors, 2 works, and comparing. Don't use first person, so don't say in my opinion or I think. Just be authoritative and direct. This author uses, or this author is better. Not in my opinion, this author is better. Not I think this author is better, just this author is better. You just want to be strong and authoritative and know you. Know when you read the story, you might think that. Don't say that. Say when readers encounter this story or when people read this story. I think everything else is pretty self-explanatory, but I just wanted to make sure that we talked about the prompts, how to answer them, make sure that you have strong organization, make sure you come up with a thesis statement. So essentially you want to answer the prompt in 1 sentence as your thesis. That thesis statement will go at the end of your introductory paragraph. Okay, so your thesis is not a paragraph. Your thesis is a statement, okay, that answers the prompt very succinctly. You're going to lead up to that thesis in your introduction. Lead up to it by introducing your authors, introduce the stories, introduce what they're talking about, introduce maybe some of the ideas from the prompt, but then end that introductory paragraph with a strong thesis statement. Then go into each of your body paragraphs and your points. Make sure you've got strong topic sentences for every paragraph. Make sure that you are citing from your stories using author's last name and page number. If you have questions along the way, please reach out to me. I hope this video is helpful. Sorry, I've just already had a lot of questions on these prompts, and so I wanted to make sure that I address them. Happy writing. If you have already submitted your essay and these instructions made you realize, oh, I need to go back and maybe look at this again, feel free to resubmit. You can resubmit as many times as you want up until that due date. Please pay attention to your due dates, guys. Yeah. Happy writing.